Future times. Time has passed. In the year 2035, Peter and Angelina left the sealed community near Fishkill for good, knowing that they could never return, but felt ever safe from the new viruses and knowing that they would only be in contact with each other in the old sandstone farmhouse of the naturally purified forest. They had each always been isolated in their personality types, as had now been revealed through the insights of the new millennium, being introverted intuitive feelers, a mere 1% of the population, and especially isolated in school among the dutiful sensing judging types, the competent intuitive thinking types, and the playful sensing perceiving types, until they met each other, that is, which was, by the way, a 1 in 10,000 chance. Peter would often joke to Angelina that he had to go through 9,999 women to find her, and she would always say that no one ever loved her like Peter did since they could never understand her. Yes, the bonding of two intuitive feeling types certainly led to what others types might call a lot of mush. But in this age of pandemics, there were advantages to being able to enjoy another person's presence and fantasies 24 hours a day. Other advances of the new age had brought to direct light the very biochemical nature of our being, with such old ideas of religious souls and other magical properties now long gone the way of alchemy, astrology, and the dodo bird. Clearly now, evolution and all that it entailed was appreciated by all but a few of the forever delusioned. Furthermore, drugs had been tamed to remove the worst of the aversive biological substrates from the mind, especially spurious high anxiety, depression, obsession, and insane violence. And, optionally, those unwelcome emotions that have always been forced upon us, such as jealousy.
Advances of the new age had brought to direct light the very biochemical nature of our being, with such old ideas of religious souls and other magical properties now long gone. The way of alchemy, astrology, and the dodo bird. Clearly now evolution and all that it entailed was appreciated by all but a few of the forever delusion. Have been made to remove the worst of the aversive biological substrates from the mind, especially high anxiety, depression, obsession, panic, and insane violence, and optionally other unwelcome forced emotions.
However, new and virulent infections still swept the body, especially in the year 2025, when over 2 billion died of EBL in Europea. But at least more and more of the myths of past ignorances, no longer excusable in the age of information, had given way to the solutions of science and had gone far past the simple DNA revelations of the previous century. Indeed, the human genome had been mapped even in the late 1990s, and now, some 30-some years later, had inspired cures for cancer, leukemia, and almost every other genetic disease. Humans now had a lifespan of who knows how long, for it remained to be seen, and if recent work on the aging preventative drugs came to fruition, perhaps one could live forever. For there were now drugs that lengthened the junk DNA telomeres that protected the ends of the DNA strands that were formerly torn away during cell division.
lifespan of who knows how long, for there were drugs that lengthened the junk, DNA that protected the ends of the strands that were formerly torn away, doing cell division as like shoelaces fray.
As discussed previously, horrible and torturous emotions were seen for what they were, that is, just spurious molecular events. And so serotonin reuptake inhibitors became the new fluoride of the water supply, so that the primitive and long useless negative feedback mechanisms in our central nervous systems could no longer send out thousands of years old notices. Therefore, we could no longer be plagued by, for example, the horrid persistence of negative or anxious thoughts, that downward spiraling feedback loop which never led to anything positive. Blame itself had, of course, fallen too, as it had to, after it had been proved that aggressive urges were not completely controllable due to the remaining chemical imbalances of the brain. But criminals were still locked up in order to protect society. Free will itself was still on shaky ground, but falling fast as it was realized that the brain's decisions are predetermined by memories, associations, and learned behaviors right up to the instant of choice. Free will had, in fact, been declared nonsensical, as the free and free will didn't actually mean anything. For what good would be a brain that made random or semi-random choices based on nothing?
Realize that the brain's decisions are predetermined by memories, associations, and learned behaviors right up to the instant of choice. Free will had in fact been declared nonsensical, as the free will didn't actually mean anything. For what good would be a brain that made random choices? Saying free will didn't actually mean anything. For what good would be a brain that made random?
Many, of course, still thought that they had choices, such as, let's say, taking up smoking. But since those choices were only apparent and not really them, they didn't ever take those choices. Furthermore, it was discovered that 90% of what the brain did didn't even reach one's consciousness. And what did reach consciousness came a startling half a second after the brain was done doing its analysis, giving us, at the very most perhaps, somewhat of a minor veto power, still of the brain's origination, but showing that we were often just executives and or tourists along for the ride, and certainly out of the brain's deep and formative loop.
I've discovered that 90% of what the brain did didn't even reach one's consciousness, and what did reach came a startling half a second after the brain was done doing its analysis, showing that we were just tourists along for the ride.
However, the person as a whole was, at least, still real, and now, faced with all these revelations, was strangely free, not only from the superstitions and folk science of 2,000 years ago, but also in the way that the existentialists had hinted at, free to create a meaning out of one's life. Consciousness, at the end of the day, was seen to be of a fundamental dual form of information, reflecting that of the neurological, this like the quantum world, showing complementarity and correspondence, a basic force even like space-time and mass energy, that reflected brain processes as conscious information, albeit 300 to 500 milliseconds later. Animals had been long recognized as having consciousness too, and feeling like humans, although to a lesser degree, and some, as such, like chimps, became as special and protected as humans and were granted personhood status.
Some animals, like chimps, were granted personhood status. Humans now had a lifespan of who knows how long, for there were drugs that lengthened the junked DNA that protected the ends of the strands that were formerly torn away during cell division.
Luckily, too, science had developed tasty artificial meat, and so cattle and other animals no longer needed to be slaughtered by us, who they would have surely regarded, if they could, as Hitlers.
Science had developed tasty artificial meat.
What we think is hard reality is but a much better representation. Sights are seen and sounds are heard, things are felt and touched, but do not exist exactly as such, but are made as so by our modeling of reality, the same as that used in dreams. In night dreams, random brainwaves and memories, associations and learnings are woven from their real frequency domains, although the dreams come from static and noise that the brain still uses to try to make sense of as best it can in its half-awake, half-working state, for that is its job. As in waking life, we feel and touch things in our dreams, as well as taste and smell them. Basically, our vision interprets waves, fields, and interference patterns. People had come to see what was absolute, eternal, and the basis of all existence, realizing that all of the stuff in our world, including our brains, minds, and consciousness, is biological and is made of molecules, and they are made of atoms, which in turn are made of electrons and quarks, or both from vibrating strings, perhaps, whatever it is that we call that which is the bottommost material stuff. Let us simply call it energy. For the form does not matter. It may be a field, actual stuff, or some swirling energy that gives us an illusion of solidity, or even a vibrating string. What's important is that it is the most fundamental and absolute substance, which implies that each and every composite system made from it is totally dependent on it for its existence. Everything, even God's. Energy being made of itself, either having been always there, or a balanced and ongoing distribution of nothing, it doesn't matter which, cannot be created or destroyed, and was therefore, or its ever distributed sourcing, eternal and omnipresent. This was called God, the ground of determination. Energy can, perhaps, as said, even amount to nothing and come from nothing, for perhaps nothing is composed and balanced of opposite, plus and minus aspects of this energy. Perhaps nothing is what our universe will eventually amount to. But for now, somehow positive energy prevails around here, since we are indeed here, and has separated or balanced from with the negative, and has granted us a preponderance of plus-type stuff in our universe, antimatter being elsewhere, or perhaps the minus-type stuff is embodied in gravity's power. It doesn't really matter that much where it is. God and Brahman solutions are short-sighted, being merely the formation of a larger question that one then takes as an answer. Besides, systems of mind doing planning, thinking, and doing cannot be first, for the parts beneath would have to be there earlier. The simpler that stuff is, the more unstable it is, excepting the inert, ever going through phase changes and or recombining upward, so this is a clue. Energy must be conserved, not being able to come from nowhere unless it is balanced, positive and negative, so this is a clue. The universe is here, this being any old time and place that is not special, so this is a clue. Jumping to a conclusion from the two impossible choices, it could be that, since forever stuff just is, that it had no prime mover. However, if it is a distribution of the perfectly unstable and simplest state, nothing, then that explains the ongoing production of opposite virtual pairs. And since this has been going on forever, it is pretty much the same as saying that stuff was forever, so we can even combine the two. However, if not, it doesn't even matter for the conclusions. These being that we are free to be and that totality had no creation, thus leaving out a creator, which is why we are free. Not to again mention the impossibility of the first cause already being complicated. So the simple toe, as simple it must be, is that any old result could have come about here or anywhere, and perhaps always did and does anytime, anywhere. Either that, or there is just one universe, its self-matching totality, one that recycles itself over billions of years. But this is but a small point, the important points being that the notion of the causeless is itself the Tohu, this causeless necessarily being the law of no law, one with no particular formation, and that there could be no built-in meaning, which may be disturbing to some who wanted to be watched over, but they forget that they then would not have the ultimate freedom to make their own meaning of outlife and the situation of the human condition. Note that all this becomes the same result for those who say that they don't know. So the temporary conclusion is that the why is that something must be because nothing cannot stay. The how being some kind of balance of opposites occurring from the only possible prime mover that is ever infinite and eternal, nothing, such as the virtual pairs or positive stuff versus negative gravity, or even the polarity of charge nullifying all existence in the overview, the ever-production of stuff ongoing, this being akin to it always there. It's not as interesting as we thought it would be, but then again, how could it be way, way down? The real excitement is at the other end of the spectrum, the complex, where we are thrust into existence, which even precedes in importance that of essence. Of course, this doesn't stop some mammals from making things up, such as that life can only come from life, even then abruptly flip-flopping to then say that the life then didn't need to come from life, etc. Their initial basis now in a shambles, but whoever said that mammals had to be sensible? Some are so silly as to say that all is fake, as like for show in a dream, only then to have some actually really real guy beneath named Brahman popping up all of the sudden, drowsing, sleeping, and dreaming his life away, his own means of being totally unexplained and ignored. This being some kind of strange psychological stopping point of complete satisfaction, totally contrary to their big need for explanation of a lesser question in the first place. Well, some mammals are not only vainglorious and far from humble, thinking themselves to be the center of all and the measure of all things, but just plain weird, making outright baseless and ungrounded pronunciations by fiat, even then deceptively preaching these theories as fact and truth to the young and unsuspecting, even compounding that lack of ethics but trying to protect the beliefs of the imaginary invisibles by going to war over them, onto their own bloody end.